to go.
We don't have victories.
Reaching for new heights.
Hello and welcome back to the second episode of In Space and on the Left. I am...
Sorry, we're still training on this. Go ahead, Justin. Give the give the intro. Give the intro.
No. You obviously want it. So now the burden is on you.
The burden is on me. Well, I was just gonna say hi, everybody. So it's still on you.
Well, I was just gonna say hi, everybody. So I guess that takes care of the intro.
Yeah. So this is our second episode. I think a couple housekeeping chores are going to be in order. One of the things that I felt like was important to mention was some of the information that we're going to be covering is going to seem a little bit out of date, and that's because we're kind of working on the kinks of our production, and also because of our bi-weekly schedule, it allows us to kind of research a specific topic in a decent amount of depth and then give it to y'all. So
that way we're not spreading ignorance, because we ain't about ignorance.
Except for when you go to tinfoil land.
It's conspiracy land, okay?
Whatever.
And I know when I'm in conspiracy land, and I know how to leave conspiracy land. This Russia stuff is like an early Tom Clancy novel. It is thrilling. But I know how to separate fact from fiction and hype from facts. So
all right, fair enough. And so just kind of recap the format and who we are. I'm Carl Clark, resident liberal space nut. I've done several internships at NASA, at the Johnson Space Center, the Goddard Space Flight Center, and the Stennis Space Center. I have been a student civil servant, so that oath that you hear public officials take, I've taken it. But here are
official.
Yeah, I know. Here are my opinions, my take on some of the news of the day, some of the science, and trying to actually really talk a little bit more about the policy of space, rather than, say, a recent discovery of ice plumes from one of Saturn's moon, Enceladus, and the same thing happened with Jupiter's moon, Europa, not too long ago. I want to talk about policy and give you my my liberal snowflake view on the exploration of the most hazardous environment known to humans, because snowflakes, we're really good at going into hazardous situations.
I say we just strap a barrel of gasoline to somebody, light a match, and point them at the sky. You know, we'll get so much more testing done that way. We'll just do it. We'll just do it Russian style, man. Just put people in explosive tubes and see what happens.
In defense of the Russians, they actually didn't really do that, and they were and are really good at sending people into space. I mean, we could kind of maybe say the North Koreans, but they tend to drop tubes of explosives on people. Like Kim Jong-un executed one of his uncles or something like that by dropping a bomb on him from a jet plane. It was like, wow.
Dude, that's how you really hate someone. All right. But
anyway,
we have, as always, we have two topics that are going to be the main focus of the show. Carl's is going to be about space, and mine is going to be about the environment. Now, this is not always going to be the case every episode. We're going to switch it up. Not always talk about space, not always talk about the environment. But since those are the fields that we are both most interested in, Carl with space and myself with the environment, be prepared for a lot of in-depth policy talk and ideas around that. So
I mean, it is why we call ourselves In Space and On the Left, because, you know, if Han Solo taught us anything, having the right moves means drifting lazily to the left.
Yeah. So Carl, you want to take the first 20-minute lead and talk about it was the exploratory missions?
20 minutes.
Yeah, you're on the clock. You got 20 minutes.
You're funny. So
well,
let's
give us your best, most condensed
version. So let's
version.
see if we can actually get through this. So in mid-February, NASA got a Valentine's letter from our acting administrator. And when I say our, I mean the American people's acting administrator of NASA. And he sent an email to the entire workforce talking about a mission called EM1. And so we have missions called expeditions that go up to the space station, and so EM stands for Exploration Mission. NASA loves acronyms. NASA is an acronym. And in government, the government loves acronyms to begin with. NASA even more so. I got a hold of a flight plan of a shuttle mission once, and it had adjectives that were acronyms. But anyway, so that is the acronym for the next series of missions that are going to explore. So they're called exploration missions. And EM1 is scheduled to fly in late 2018, early 2019. And this email from Robert Lightfoot, the acting administrator, directed NASA's associate administrator at headquarters, who's the head of the exploration directorate, to initiate a study to see if NASA should put a crew in EM1. Now, this is a major, major change from previous plans over the last 6 years. So my speculation is something like this is not coming in from anywhere but the White House. This is something from the Trump administration, most likely. In the waning days of the campaign, they started to get some measure of interest in space, mainly because Florida is a swing state, I think, and there
it's a big
are
chunk of their economy down there.
Yeah, it's a big. Well, the Kennedy Space Center is there, so
yeah, I mean it's a big business down there for them, just like how in Houston, Space City is a big deal.
Yeah, so that's kind of my general feeling, is that he wanted something along those lines, and some kind of big move to make this thing his own, because the SLS is an Obama initiative. The exploration missions are all Obama. The only thing that's not Obama is the Orion, and that's the crew capsule that takes you up and brings you back down. So I just threw out a whole lot of acronyms, so I think it'd be good at this point, now that we have a little bit of the background of what this is. This is a big change in NASA's programmatic policy towards the next stage of human exploration in the solar system. So now I throw out those acronyms of things. Well, what are those things? Well, first of all, you have the Space Launch System. It is a really, really big rocket. It is a very powerful rocket. It's going to be the most powerful rocket in the world. And it uses several key pieces of shuttle technology, or what's called legacy technology. And one of those key pieces is tested over at the Stennis Space Center. And that is the RS-25, formerly known as the Space Shuttle Main Engine. And NASA and the contractor who builds the engines, Aerojet Rocketdyne, made some changes so we can have more oxygen going into the system, and we do that by cooling the oxygen down more. And it's a very fine line, because if you start forming ice crystals of oxygen going into this engine, you get a blown up engine, because crystals in something that has something going at about 38,000 RPM, the turbines of the turbo pumps, it ends up being a bad day. It ends up being a bad day. So NASA is working on testing this engine, new flight controllers for the engine, because the RS-25 is a very smart engine. It's a very powerful engine, a very compact engine, and a very efficient engine. This engine is amazing. And it was amazing during the shuttle era as well. And the way I kind of like to refer to it is like, well, the SSME, or the Space Shuttle Main Engine, is a Ferrari. The RS-25 is a Formula One. And so that's what those upgrades give us. Then there is the solid rocket boosters, and NASA's adding on a sixth segment onto that so that it can provide a little bit more power. It's been tested twice in tests called QM, so QM1, QM2. On QM2, there was a new camera used that was developed at the Stennis Space Center that was able to see into the plume of exhaust coming out of it, and actually you could see the dynamics of the gases and things like that, whereas if you just use a regular camera and only observe it in the electromagnetic spectrum that humans can see, it's not a thing. You can't really see in there. So that was really, really cool. The video that was taken went viral.
Oh yeah, so you can watch that video online.
Oh yeah.
All right, cool.
Really, I think it bears mentioning that yes, I did work at NASA. Recently, my internship program ended. I fully plan on going back, but just because I worked there and I have relationships with people there, first of all, does not mean I in any way speak for the agency, but also doesn't mean that all this information that I'm giving you is in any way insider. Like, most of the information that I'm giving you is coming from some NASA studies that are available on a public archive of studies.
Yeah,
you can look them up yourself.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize how big the NASA archives really are. Like, there is a ton of information available at your fingertips.
It is huge.
But I do know Google's not the best at parsing through it. Like, you can get some good keyword searches, but if you want to find something on there, you kind of have to know how to navigate the site and dig in a little bit deeper than normal.
Well, it is a government site, so
yeah, they have an intern running
we'll leave a link up to it because it is a great resource to know what your space agency, if you're an American, and if you are Japanese, Canadian, European, or Russian, what one of your chief international partners for your space agency is working on.
They also have some great climate research up there too. Like some of the best figures and graphs and stuff you'll find anywhere on the internet.
And then recently, Houston, for all you video editors out there and stuff like that, they recently started an archive of all NASA video and all NASA images.
So don't you say tax dollars don't get you anything. You got an archive. You got an archive of video.
And it's free.
And public domain.
All you have to do is attribute it to NASA if you use it in your videos. It's amazing. It's not free. We pay for it every April 15th.
Yeah.
But
I mean, you don't have to pay any extra. You know what I meant.
Yeah. So anyway, that's where I'm getting a lot of this stuff. And I'm saying that to say that, like, these are things that you can learn. Please come to us and be curious and comment and all that kind of stuff like that. But and get our take on it, because I also do have all this experience with the agency, speaking to engineers and learning from scientists.
He knows how to speak the acronyms, people. He knows how to speak the acronyms.
Not as good as I would like. But anyway, so next you have, after the solid rocket boosters, then you have the idea of the SLS Block 1. And so that's what NASA's going to be flying for the first 2 to 3 exploration missions. Then there's Block 2. And then there's Block 2A and Block 2B. And Block 2B has the advanced booster, which is going to be even more powerful than the 6-segment SRB. And we don't quite know what that one's going to look like yet. Design reviews are still ongoing. Then there's the Orion, or the Multi-Purpose Crew Vehicle. It can spend 21 days on orbit with its own consumables, and that's with a crew of 4. Sorry about the dogs, if you can hear them. And it can take you out beyond low Earth orbit, and it can bring you back. So its heat shield is really robust and good. One of the things that I read in the study is that they've done some calculations on going through the Van Allen radiation belts. And one of the concerns isn't just the radiation to humans, because obviously that's kind of important when we put people on rockets, that we want to make sure they're safe. Some of the electronics are actually more sensitive than humans are to the types of charged particles and radiation that is captured in the Earth's Van Allen radiation belts, which, by the way, I know that's one of the arguments for moon hoaxing and stuff like that. I'm sorry to anybody who's listening to this who thinks that that is what held us back from actually landing on the moon. But no, we flew to the moon 9 times. We landed there 6 times. We tried for 7, but Apollo 13 didn't quite make it, but they made it home. You can fly through the Van Allen radiation belts. It's not that big of a deal. It's a big enough deal that you need to worry about them, but there are things you can do to do it. So I'm not taking any guff from any moon hoaxers here in this podcast. Like, that's just not a place that we're going to go. You'll be taken to school.
This is not a safe space for moon hoaxers.
Yeah, this is not a safe space for moon hoaxers. You can go with Bart Serboll and get punched by Buzz Aldrin. And that would be humorous because, God, that man is made of granite. Like,
I mean, have you seen the way he moves on Dancing with the Stars? Of course he's made of granite.
Well, yeah, but he also shot down MiGs in Korea and has a PhD in orbital mechanics when most people didn't even know what orbital mechanics was from MIT. And yes, that's the acronym of the actual school.
MIT.
Yeah.
MIFT, man.
Yeah. So, yeah, just don't bring that stuff around here. It's utterly ridiculous. We went to the moon, and we're going to most likely go back. But I digress. So some of the reporting on the Orion and its hardware systems talked about the radiation levels of the Van Allen radiation belts, and 2 times through them is the equivalent exposure is 6 months on the International Space Station. Then we have the service module, which has all the oxygen and stuff like that, and it has the primary orbital maneuvering system. And the orbital maneuvering system actually on the Orion, there's two systems, one primary and one backup. And the primary is actually the orbital maneuvering engine from one of the shuttles. So if you can't tell, there's a lot of stuff that has been used here, has already been used. Like, as a matter of fact, the RS-25 engines that will launch EM-1 and EM-2 into space have already lifted people up into space on a shuttle mission. And after EM-3, Aerojet Rocketdyne will start actually producing new engines that are even more upgraded than the upgrades that have been done to these current ones. So this is all legacy hardware. A lot of this stuff is known. Then the other part of the SLS is the ICPS, or Interim Cryogenic Propulsion Stage. And it is derived from the second stage of the Delta IV, which is typically it's a United Launch Alliance, which is a private company, and it's typically used to deploy Department of Defense payloads. It's a very reliable stage. It uses the RL-10 engine, which is a very fuel-efficient, low-power engine, really great for space travel. And then we have the EUS, the Exploration Upper Stage. So this is the stage that will be used on Block 1B, Block 2A, and 2B. And I like to refer to this as the big stage and the ICPS as the little stage or the putt knocker, because the EUS, or the bigger stage, has 4 RL-10s, has considerably more propellant and more of something called delta V, or delta velocity. So you have delta, which is the direction, and then you have velocity, which is your speed. And everything out in space, for those of y'all who haven't played Kerbal Space Program, go do it. That's your homework. But you will see that game really illustrates very well what delta V is. It helps you shape your curves. And everything in space is all curves, all circles, all curves. So that helps the power that you can put in a direction will shape your curve and tell you where you're going in space. And the bigger stage, the EUS, has considerably more capability than the smaller stage, the little putt knocker. So that's my favorite little component there of the SLS is actually the bigger upper stage, because all the rest of it, it's just to get that stuff up there. And if you don't have the exploration upper stage, I cannot stress this enough, everything else that you want to do, land on the moon if that's what you want to do, go grab an asteroid, go to an asteroid, deploy a lunar space station, deploy a outpost at one of the Lagrange points, which is a stable Earth-Moon orbit, or eventually aggregate enough hardware to go on a crewed Mars mission, which is the end goal, which, by the way, both Republicans and Democrats are pretty resoundingly united on, is American footprints on Mars. At some point in the 2030s is our big thing right now. That's and I've grown up in the space program, and there's been lots of talk of Mars before, but there has never been this kind of sustained political will over the past decade for this. So that is something that is very encouraging on both sides of the aisle. So that's the exploration upper stage. If you want to do something, anything, out in deep space, if you want these exploration missions to be able to actually really do something, then you need that stage. Then another thing that is important in all of this, in the proposal of putting a crew on Exploration Mission 1, is the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel. And it's their job, and I believe they were put in place after the Challenger disaster. Their job is to look at a mission profile for crewed missions and figure out ways of making sure that it's safe, or if it's safe. That's their primary job, is the safety of the crew, considering where aborts are, backups, all that kind of stuff. That's their job.
So they're kind of like the last line of defense.
There's lots of lines of defense. I don't think that they're the last one. The last line of defense is actually the Kennedy Space Center.
Okay,
and
but they're just
in
a check along the way then.
Yeah, they are,
Okay.
but they are a big check.
Yeah.
Because when you're done writing up a mission proposal, they're the people that are going to go over that thing with a fine-tooth comb and say, hey, you need to add some safeguards here, 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 and here. Otherwise, we're not putting our stamp on this, and this thing is not flying.
Yeah.
The three big final checks are the Kennedy Space Center's launch team, the mission control team in Houston, and the crew.
Okay.
Because if an astronaut says we're not going, we're not going. If the flight director in Houston says we're not going, or one of their flight controllers says, hey, a system isn't good, we're not going.
So what I hear you're getting at is the Trump administration wants to put people on these exploratory missions when they might not be ready in time.
So that has not been part of the current plan. And the Exploration Mission 1 is something that was going to be happening in 2018, 2019, late 2018, 2019, and it was going to be an uncrewed mission. And it was likely going to fly so we're going to kind of get into the mission profiles now. And it was likely going to fly let me see. I have it in here somewhere. Reference mission. Yeah. It was likely going to fly a high lunar flyby with the possibility of putting it into orbit.
Okay.
And that was going to be the uncrewed mission.
And it's not gonna do that now. Is what the new order is asking.
And as a matter of fact, all right, so I found the part of my notes here. So the mission that's currently the uncrewed plan for EM1 is something called the Distant Retrograde Orbit. Originally, it was going to be a high lunar flyby, and then we're like, if we don't put it into orbit, what the heck's the point? So what is a distant retrograde orbit? So imagine, hold your fist out in front of you, that's the moon, and it moves from right to left. You want to fly by it in front of its motion, because then the moon will pull on you, and you fly out about 70,000, 60,000 kilometers away from it, and that pulls you into an orbit around the moon, but your motion around the moon is the opposite of the moon's direction around the Earth, which is really great because then the moon pulls on you, slows you down, so now all you have to do is speed up just enough to escape, and then you're not going that fast, so the Earth's gravity automatically just grabs you and you come home. So it's a more stable lunar orbit, and it's a safer one.
Yeah, from what we were talking, you kind of described it as it's like the honeypot zone, you know.
Well, that's
it's
a different orbit, and we'll get there here in a minute. This is similar, but
I thought we were on it was the retrograde is the good one. This is
no, that is the near rectilinear orbit.
The near rectilinear orbit. That's the one we're going to get to that one. Okay, I jumped the gun.
For all those that are ass people, you will appreciate this because the rectilinear orbit is the bee's knees in all of these plans, in all of these different courses. So you have an option of doing a high lunar orbit, and in all of these orbits, they would be what's called eccentric. So which means you would have a point when you're swinging down low to the moon and you're flying really high out. So the high lunar orbit, which was originally being considered for Exploration Mission 2, because you'd be entering and exiting in and out of orbit, and if you had a crew on it, you would want to have had a flyby first to kind of proof everything out, and you'd have the extra delta V from the bigger stage, even though that this mission profile was originally written for a crew with the smaller stage.
Okay.
Which that's a little bit of history there that's important to know. So last year around this time, Congress mandated that NASA crew rate the bigger upper stage for the second mission, which is important because if we didn't, if NASA hadn't been mandated to do that, we would have used the smaller stage for the second mission. That mission would have had less capability, and it would have kind of postponed the 2020s from really doing a lot of really cool big stuff in lunar orbit. So this was a really good decision, and I know our name is in space and on the left, but this was a good choice from the Republicans on the committee. It was a bipartisan choice. So, you know, when I see bipartisan work and I see good ideas coming from the other political side, I'm going to say it because we need good governance. That was a good choice. That was a good policy decision. I wish it had been made sooner because it would have smoothed things out. But the bigger upper stage is on track, even though this was a little bit of a short notice, for EM2 in 2021, 2022. And we're just going to use the smaller stage in 2019, 2018. So you could use the smaller stage for a high lunar orbit where it goes down low at 100 kilometers and swings out high at 10,000 kilometers. And that would be anywhere between a 9 to 13 day mission, so well within the Orion's capability. You wouldn't need to bring any extra consumables along, or you wouldn't need to reduce the size of the crew from 4 to 2. And anytime you leave for the moon, particularly with a crewed mission, NASA's going to design the trajectory to get out there to be a free return anyway, and that would be a 7-day mission.
Okay.
So there's a lot of safeguards in both what's currently being considered for EM1, which is that distant retrograde orbit, which is a much longer duration, and you would need the exploration upper stage if you wanted to have a full crew on the Orion for that. Because you'd need the food for it. You need the food, the oxygen, the extra consumables for the crew. But right now, it's the current plan for the uncrewed Exploration 1 mission, which now the Trump administration is the one that is most likely putting forth this request to see if we can put a crew on it, which means that that mission, EM1, if it has a crew on it, would likely be just a 7-day flyby out 10,000 kilometers away from the moon, because a burn to send you to the moon is actually a burn to send you home 7 days later. And that's the safest thing you can do for a vehicle that is pretty untested. Like, we've used all this hardware before, and the Orion's flown once on exploration mission or exploration flight test 1 back in December 4th of 2014.
Okay.
But that was a test. The service module isn't ready. Our European partners are making that. And so anyway, this hardware hasn't been put all together and run before in a shakedown cruise, which is what the intention of an uncrewed EM1 mission is. So moving on with...
If you had to kind of summarize your thoughts on the pros versus the cons of this updated mission, what would kind of be like the appended version of that?
The appendix version of all of this is when you look at the planning that is already, the program is already moving forward the way it's going with an uncrewed EM1. And if you crew an EM1 mission, the time it would take to do the work, to get it ready, would likely postpone it to late 2019, early 2020. And it's important to note that the year 2018 and 2019 are the 50th anniversaries of Apollo 8 and Apollo 11. And Apollo 8 was the first time humans ever left Earth orbit and went out to another celestial body, and they orbited the moon. And obviously Apollo 11 was the first time we ever landed on the moon. And this is where it kind of gets into this is why I think it was the Trump administration, high officials, and maybe even the president himself saying, hey, I want to have this happen, because it would be a big, big deal on the 50th anniversary to go and do this thing again with people and say NASA and America is back. Problem is,
this could all be just political theater?
Well, yes and no. I think there's a decent amount, in my own opinion, considering the president and my opinions of him. I think it's also not just political theater. I think it's ego theater. It's making sure that he's written in the history books as somebody that did this.
He's not just doing it for the political gain. He's also doing it to stroke his own ego because he's a self-imposed narcissist.
Well, you said it, not me.
I'll say it again.
So the big issue is, if you were to put a crew on this mission, the smaller stage would have to be crew rated. It's no longer going to be crew rated. NASA would have to take all the work that it's done crew rating the bigger stage and transfer that back over to the smaller stage. And then not only would EM1 use the smaller stage, which is already the plan, but it would then also, EM2 would once again be using the smaller stage. And we're at a place right now, which I think is much healthier, where EM2 is not using the smaller stage, where it is going to use the bigger exploration upper stage. And that brings me back to the distant retrograde orbit and the holy grail of cis-lunar space, the near rectilinear orbit. So both of these orbits are fairly stable. So is an orbit near Lagrange point 2. But with the bigger stage, you could do a longer mission. You could carry more consumables. You'd also be able to carry a secondary payload. And currently, that secondary payload is going to be the Resource Prospector rover to go down to the moon and learn how to detect water and get water out of the lunar regolith or rock. And those in situ resource utilization methods, depending on what you're trying to extract, can be similar or different if you're going from Mars. But if you're trying to get water out of rock, it's going to be similar. It's going to be the same machinery, just different temperatures that you would need to use. So this is good translatable technology for the journey to Mars. And
but the new plan kind of puts everything back.
Yeah, so it all feeds into this larger goal. But some of the other habitats you could have is a deep space or a cis-lunar hab. You could put up there a solar electric propulsion unit. One of my personal favorites is you could do the asteroid redirect mission and park a piece of an asteroid in this near rectilinear orbit. And then, of course, the resource prospector. And there's even been talk amongst our NASA's international partners to actually put together, I think it's a 5 or 6 module lunar space station. And this would be a great place to stick it. And what a near rectilinear orbit is, it's a polar orbit, it's eccentric, but instead of going from 100 kilometers above the moon to 10,000 kilometers above the moon, you would be going from 100 kilometers around the moon on the Earth side, and as you fly back out into space, you go about 70,000 kilometers out. And doing this means that you are going so far out that you end up orbiting the Earth again, but you orbit the Earth at the same speed as the moon, and then you fall back towards the moon and swing back out again. And this is a very, very stable orbit. The only other orbit that is more stable than this is a Lagrange point orbit. But the problem with a Lagrange point orbit, if I can bring up my other study that has a really great chart that NASA ran through one of its supercomputers, is in order to get access to low lunar polar orbit, it has a prohibitive delta V cost. and so does a distant retrograde orbit. It has a prohibitive delta V cost, whereas the near rectilinear orbit does not. And the reason why I'm concerned about that, even though I don't think NASA per se should be developing lunar surface hardware, I do want us to work with our international partners who are going to be developing lunar surface hardware, and I'd like our astronauts to ride with them down to the surface and ride back up and forth and do all that kind of good stuff during the 2020s before we all move on to Mars together. Because I'm a big fan of international cooperation in space. It moves slower, but it's better, and it helps promote peace in the world. So that would be my pick for an EM2 mission with a larger upper stage, is a near rectilinear orbit installing the resource prospector on the lunar surface and all that good stuff. However, if you put a crew on EM1, you're probably going to only be able to do a flyby rather than my pick for an uncrewed EM1, which would be a high lunar orbit mission, or maybe a distant retrograde orbit, which is the current idea. And
Okay.
But if you put a crew on it, you're only going to be doing a 7-day flyby. Now, there's an alternative plan called the hybrid high lunar orbit mission, which gives you lots of abort chances because you do 3 elliptical orbits around Earth, and you can return home in less than 12 hours at any point as long as you don't go out to the moon. And you do a lunar flyby at L2 at about 62,000 kilometers from the moon.
So we lose from the new plan. We lose a lot more than we would gain.
Well, the big thing that we would lose is we would lose the bigger upper stage. And again, if you don't have that,
that's what's going to get us into
you would lose a crewed upper stage. That would be you would lose a crew-rated large upper stage that it would be ready at the beginning of the 2020s.
And that larger upper stage is going to get us to...
It's key for everything. It's key for everything, because remember that list of secondary payloads that I listed off?
Yeah, you can't carry that with the smaller engine. You need the bigger engine to be crew-rated to get you to the near rectilinear orbit, right?
Yeah, and you need it to aggregate large pieces of hardware so you can move on to Mars.
Yeah, so by crewing EM1, we sacrifice crew rating the bigger upper stage, and we're forced to stick with the smaller upper stage that is already... We would have to go back and crew rate that as well.
Yeah.
We only have time to crew rate one. Which one's it going to be?
Yeah. So a little bit of historical context, and I'll try and go through this quickly, but this bears in mind because I don't want folks to say, oh, well, what about Apollo 8? That was a Hail Mary thing. It was like, well, hang on. Yes, a lot of the Space Launch System hardware is legacy hardware and stuff like that, but it hasn't been integrated together. The Saturn V had one major set of non-integrated tests, so every component of the Saturn V had been tested at least once, and then it had 3 separate full-scale integrated tests, 2 of which were flights. So it's flown in space twice, on Apollo 4 and Apollo 6.
But the one we have right now that we're trying to crew, they haven't flown in this arrangement yet.
Yeah, has not been configured, has not been, we haven't even done the green run core test out at Stennis yet of what will be the rocket that will lift EM1 up. So this stuff has not been integrated together yet.
So this whole plan is just real short-sighted. It sets us back, not even in the long run, it sets us back almost immediately for a dangerous, very short-sighted show of power, basically.
Yeah. So
that doesn't sound like Trump. What are you talking about?
Yeah, it doesn't sound like him at all. Let's do this to look cool.
Yeah.
I'd rather do stuff that is cool.
Why do you think he builds the tackiest buildings with his name written on?
Here's that's part of the reason why I'd rather do stuff that is cool is I can sell the mundane. I'm a PR guy. So that's my job. And if this is starting to sound tedious to you, like all these technicalities and stuff like that, this is scratching the surface of just how much stuff has to go into this. So I just want to touch on a few other things about the Orion and some other stuff. So we've already really touched on the big setback for not crew rating the larger upper stage for EM2. So Apollo 8, when we decided that it was going to go to the moon, it was really late in the game, true. It was on November 12th, 1968, and the crew orbited the moon on December 25th, 1968. So that sounds like, oh, well, yeah, they could train up for that really quickly. Well, oh, yeah, they could train up for that really quickly. But here's the thing. There had already been a lot of training on the Apollo system during the design phase and all this kind of stuff like that to a greater extent that has currently been done on Orion. There is no crew selected. There was already a crew selected for Apollo 8 before they decided to call the audible and send it to the moon. And again, the systems had flown before. They had actually done a shakedown cruise twice before. And by the time of Apollo 8, there was Apollo 7. There had been a crewed mission of an Apollo mission. So there had not only been
the previous most hastily constructed mission actually had a very big
more
number
preparation
of preparation
than if we put a crew on EM1.
Wow.
And for everybody who says, oh, you're using legacy shuttle hardware, and we launched STS-1, and that was the shakedown cruise, and it was crewed. Well, again, there had been 10 years of development. There had been like 3 years of training. And the crew was already selected. We haven't selected the crew for this mission yet. We're still just doing the study, and we have 2 years to get ready. This smacks to me, and this is, again, my opinion. Even though you'd be able to leapfrog a number of timeline constraints by putting a crew up early, you will, without a doubt, curtail things because of the exploration upper stage. But the big part of it to me that's very, very dangerous, and that is kind of my opinion just by the read of the situation, is this is something that in NASA we call go fever. And NASA had go fever 2 very notable times in its history. And that was Apollo 1 and STS-51L. Everyone knows that much better as the Challenger. And on January 27th and January 28th of 1967 and 1986, we lost crew. NASA put people on top of rockets, and they were in situations where someone, and people even did, but the system wasn't geared to listen, which those things have been changed. Like I said, that safety board above, someone didn't stand up and yell, say, damn it, stop. Well, I'm saying, damn it, stop. Because the plan that we have in place right now to send EM1 on, from what I read from this study, on a distant retrograde orbit, uncrewed, and then doing some kind of similar mission with an exploration upper stage, either into a distant retrograde orbit or into a near rectilinear orbit for EM2, is a good plan. It is a safe plan, and it moves us forward towards Mars. To put a crew, to put 4 families on top of this rocket, when it is hardware that is not ready as it stands, the life support system isn't even ready yet. The software systems are not ready yet. The guidance system is not ready yet. The service module for the Orion is not ready yet. And the SLS, while it is an amazing rocket, and I'm sure it will fly very well because of the people who are working to help put it together at Stennis and across the entire agency, and yes, it's legacy hardware, it has not been integrated yet. This is go fever.
And it's putting lives in danger, and it's not okay.
And there, you know, I tell you, Justin, about some of these folks. You know, I had the privilege of meeting a number of the new group of astronauts. I met their daughters. I met their wives, and I didn't have the privilege of meeting the female astronauts' husbands and children. I can't remember if they have any children or not, but what does it matter? They have mothers, they have brothers and sisters. They're people, and they are people in and of themselves getting on top of this thing for us. They are doing this for us, and there is no decision in NASA that has more gravity behind it than when you put people on top of those rockets. No decision is more considered. No decision is more important than if you send people to go strap into those couches and whether or not you turn that thing on.
And they don't even care about that right now. With this new plan, it's a second thought to the administration.
Well, like I said, I'm
you hope it's not the case, but
I hope that's not the case. And even if let's say it's not. Let's say best case scenario, like every president before him, he wants to put his own stamp on what NASA's doing. The policy pinball has already hurt the agency's progress enough. Like one of the things in his last press conference that I saw him in, the former administrator Charlie Bolden said, when he was asked about the next administration, the Trump administration, he said, well, if they don't do anything, they're going to have a great NASA. We're leaving it in amazing shape. And he's right. If just things keep going the way they're going, and if the congressional committees keep doing what they're doing and keep giving NASA money that is close to being commensurate with inflation, NASA will accomplish these tasks.
So this should be easy for Trump. Just leave it alone. You don't have to touch it.
You don't have to touch it, and you'll be the one to do it.
Yeah,
this mission leaves in 2021, 2022.
Yeah.
I would think he thinks that he's going to win re-election.
But I guess we'll see if cooler heads prevail and they decide to follow the pre-established plan, or if they're going to give in. Not give in. That was the wrong word. But if the pressure is enough where they feel they have to follow the new administration's plan.
Well, Mike, I think the safety institutions are very strong at NASA.
Yeah. So
very strong.
Closing thoughts on this, Carl?
My closing thoughts are this. So if it decides to move forward, crew EM1, if America decides to crew EM1 and NASA is ordered to do that, I think it will postpone a human landing on Mars. I think it will endanger the lives of 4 astronauts, maybe 2, to a greater degree than would be necessary under the current plan. And I think if NASA were to do it and to do it safely, it would also postpone things. And it would, in essence, do it just to make sure that a president is able to do it in their first term. That is not a reason to send 4 people into the most hazardous environment and send them farther away from home than anyone has ever gone. It's not a good reason. There are good reasons to do that. They are in the current plan, and that should be stuck with. So I think that the safety structure at NASA will find a way to make it safe, but that's going to push things back.
So you give this new administration's plan 2 thumbs down.
Yeah, it's a bad idea.
All right.
If Obama wanted to do it back, say 3-4 years ago, I would say hell yeah, let's do it, because we have time.
But now the timeline is just not there.
It's too constrained, and more money won't do it. All that kind of stuff like that.
No.
Charlie Bolden even said, even if you increase NASA's budget, you wouldn't get us to Mars any sooner. You just make it more likely.
No.
Because there's too much big machinery moving.
All right. So now that you are versed in why the Trump administration's short-sightedness could endanger our mission to Mars and the lives of our astronauts,
and are at least hopefully semi-well versed in cis-lunar orbital mechanics and also all the hardware NASA's building on your behalf, which, by the way, the SLS cost you 1 20-ounce Coke a year.
I think I'm going to have to take remedial NASA acronyms because I won't lie, that's a lot of acronyms. I have my notes going over here, but I think once we get more used to the talking about it, I'll catch on a little faster with the acronyms.
You know, I will say this about what the administration is considering doing. There are some legitimate reasons why you would want to do this. It would leapfrog a number of goals, but
it's an overall setback.
To me, because of the exploration upper stage, the bigger stage, not being created by the second mission, it just seems like a big setback to me, because that thing gives you so much more power to do more stuff sooner than just being able to send crew up sooner. Like, that really doesn't give you a whole lot just saying, hey, we can fly people around the moon. Well, we're going to be doing that anyway. It's just a little bit later. And we'll have more capability to do it because we'll have this larger upper stage. So,
all right.
If they really have genuine desires to move America forward, this isn't the way to do it. And if they're doing it for ego and to be in the history books before they get kicked the hell out of there because of tinfoil hatland Russ's stuff, if they just lose an election, then that is negligence of some of the best people I have ever had the privilege of meeting. Greatest lions that we've ever had into a hazardous environment by sheep and by lambs. So those are my final thoughts on it.
All right. So now we are going to travel back in time about 12,000 years.
And return to Earth.
And return to Earth. We're actually going to go halfway across the globe, though. We're going to be in the area along the Euphrates and the Tigris in the Eastern Mediterranean, known as the Fertile Crescent. All right? This is what is sometimes called the birthplace of agriculture as we know it today. This has historically been some of the best cropland in most of the world, honestly. This area now, if you are versed in geography, you probably already know this. If you're not, let me help you out. The Eastern Mediterranean it touches a number of powder keg countries right now. We have Turkey, Israel, the upper parts of Egypt around the Nile, not into the main body of Egypt, just kind of around the parts that touch the Mediterranean Sea. You have Israel, and you also have this country which no one's seen in the news recently called Syria. Actually,
hey, wait, what was that country again? I haven't heard of it.
It's called Syria. It's pretty obscure.
Yeah.
Actually,
I seem to
all of Syria is in this fertile.
Being mentioned in the movie Kingdom of Heaven, Damascus. Yeah. Does that happen to be in that country?
I don't know. It's just too obscure, you know. It's just it's such a small little. I've never heard of it country, but the Fertile Crescent makes up the majority.
Erdogan runs that country, right? No, wait, no, he's the head of a NATO ally, Turkey. God, who?
Now this is run by a great guy, outstanding citizen. His name is Bashar al-Assad. You know, he's
an all-around wonder boy of the douchebag crowd.
Yeah, but this area makes up most of Syria, the Fertile Crescent, and it also touches in upper or the lower parts of Turkey. A town. I know it's not pronounced this way, but it makes me sad that this is happening to this town. The town is called Batman. But, you know, that's just a little fun fact. Anyway, so the Fertile Crescent makes up the majority of Syria. And in 2006, the end of 2006, the beginning of 2007, Syria had the worst drought in its recorded history. We have precipitation measurements and temperature measurements.
Since this is the cradle of civilization, do you happen to have an idea of how long recorded history goes back here, just to give our audience an idea of?
So the study that I'm pulling this from is from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States of America.
Oh, they're not credible at all.
No, PNAS not credible at all. And this was published in 2015, so it's already 2 years out of date. And we'll get into how that can be a big change. Change can happen quick with the climate right now. but this was published in 2015.
Can't get it.
And
Changed climate. He
Yeah.
reversed it.
And the graphs on this go back to the end of the 1800s, early 1900s. So we have a little over a century's worth of data here that we're working with.
So not quite 12,000 years, but
Well, we have been able to obtain soil samples and look at the kind of makeup of what's the word I'm looking for? The vegetation and all. Yeah, everything was like with and the different levels of chemicals in it, particularly carbon dioxide. That's a big one we look for.
Carbon and nitrogen, I would imagine, is what they're looking for, because decomposing material releases nitrogen, and there's the carbon. You'd be able to maybe extrapolate how much was in the atmosphere, but also you'd get an idea for how much is living material is what was around.
Yeah, but the study that I'm pulling this from, it doesn't measure soil samples. It's just looking at the recorded temperatures and the recorded precipitation and a few other things, like just in general, how well is the soil doing that year? How good is it for growing crops?
You know who's really good at monitoring all that stuff from really high up?
NASA.
Yeah. You got that right really quickly.
Well, we just talked about how they had an abundance of climate change research on their database.
That's fair.
But anyway, so they started having this drought at the end of 2006, early 2007. It's the worst in recorded history, and it lasted until 2010. Well, what happened in 2011? The Syrian revolution began. And while it's not the only reason, it is a major reason, and that is climate change in affecting how the Syrian revolution played out. Like I said, it's not the only reason. Bashar al-Assad could have not been a dick and could have done a lot of things different, and his father could have done a lot of things different whenever he was in power, whenever this drought started. He actually, in order to become reelected, he put forth a lot of policies that did not really jive well with good farming practices. It overworked the soil and everything like that and exacerbated the drought problem. Anyway, so you have 1.5 million Syrian rural refugees flooding into their cities. At the same time, you have a bunch of Iraqi refugees flooding into Syrian cities. Couple that with the fact that Bashar al-Assad is a dick, it's no surprise that you get revolution in 2011 or 2011. So how do we know that climate change was one of the pushing factors on this? Well, we have this thing that we've taken from the data, and it's called the natural variance. And the natural variance, you have like the natural variance of like the rain, and it takes the data from the early 1900s to today and makes an average of what is the average rainfall. And what we found is that when you take all the natural variances into account, it doesn't explain why this drought was so severe and why it was so long. They've never had droughts of this severity and length before, and it falls outside the margins of the margin of what is the natural variance. What it does match up with really well, though, is the models we have for climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. It's almost a perfect match. You see a lot of warming in the Eastern Mediterranean, and that's causing less rain, and it's also causing the soil to become drier, so when it does rain, it doesn't absorb as much of the water as fast, and it causes things like flash flooding, which then just adds on to the problem. It destroys croplands and such. And this is not just happening in Syria, it's happening all over the world. Particularly, it's happening a lot on the Eastern Mediterranean in a lot of these powder keg countries. So keep an eye on this area. You're going to have more problems from this region if we don't figure out a way to tackle how bad climate change is affecting these areas. And that doesn't even go into the geopolitical climate of the region. And whenever you do have things like this happening, you have other nations that try to gain power over, they try to tackle the chaos that is these powder keg regions and take it for themselves.
Well, the other thing that I think is important to note. First of all, like you said, this is going to kind of only be the beginning of this, and you look how crappily the rest of the world is really handling this. You look at how refugees from Syria are being treated in Europe. You look at a lot of the European nations' ability to integrate foreign populations, particularly foreign Muslim populations. Like, it's not as bad as, like, it's reported on Fox News, where there's places where the cops can't go and stuff like that. Or at least nothing that I've seen from anything terribly credible. Yeah, there are some pretty horrific crimes that have happened, but there's also other pretty horrific crimes that happen other places, like in France.
But if you think 1.5 million
Muslims are the ones that always get reported on, right? But the point is like, this is not being handled well right now, and the insidious nature of it, considering it's only going to get worse, is our fear of this other is going to really, really screw us up. Like, you saw what happened last week, as of the time of recording this. You know, as horrific as those chemical strikes were, you had the Trump administration bomb the airfield that we think perpetrated the attack. Let's just never mind, the airfield was up and running 24 hours later. But Assad is Putin's boy in the Middle East, and Russia is a nuclear power, and you have these two leaders who are of the not back downedness, you know, and some of the same things.
The whole
the
geopolitical climate it could be an episode in and of itself, how it could play out because of the instability that climate change is going to cause. Like, you could write a book on how you think the political climate is going to change because of climate change.
Yeah, that's a Tom Clancy novel right there.
Oh, it's going to be bad too. It's going to be, if it keeps playing out the way it's going to be bad. But we can take steps to stop that.
Yeah, that's kind of my general point. Like, the refugee crisis is being poorly handled. The geopolitical crisis is being poorly handled. And when
I want to get back to the refugees real quick, and like, if you think that 1.5 million Syrian refugees caused a lot of problems, look at how much animosity and turbulence this is causing all over the world. Wait until you have 150 or 250 million refugees from all over the world. You're gonna have refugees from Africa. You're gonna have refugees from South America. You're gonna have refugees from the Middle East. You're gonna have, and this is scary to think about, you're gonna have refugees from what we consider first world countries, because areas are no longer going to be able to be profitable, or you're no longer going to be able to live there in a sustainable way. So you're going to have to pack up and move.
Before you bring it over to the West, I also would like to mention, like, large parts of China and India and Indonesia and just the South Pacific in general are going to get rogered but good by this.
Yeah. So why is this?
Places that have a lot of their own historical past that hasn't bubbled forth yet in some similar ways to the Middle East. And China is no joke. It's a nuclear power, and that kind of goes back to the geopolitical stages of it, and makes me nervous about this coming weekend when it comes to North Korea. And
India is also a nuclear power.
Yeah, that too, and Pakistan. So you have a situation similar to, in my estimation, the crisis of the 3rd century in the Roman Empire, that was, to our knowledge now, a huge contributing factor to that was a large drought and famine. But now you have many nations who are going to be desperately affected by this, and their nuclear powers, or they're allied with or protectorates of other nuclear powers like North Korea and China.
Yeah, and regardless of if you agree with, I just want to bring up, even people inside the Trump administration, General Mattis has come on record and said that climate change is going to be the biggest threat to national security. And he's not the only one. Lots of generals have echoed that same statement, that climate change is going to be the leading factor in causing so much instability in regions that it is, without a doubt, the thing we need to be focused on the most.
Yeah. So, and there's two scenarios in this moving forward where we just don't do anything and we we screwed this up. And one scenario is we manage to keep a cool head on the geopolitical side. We don't destroy ourselves or really screw up and end up killing a lot of people and starting a lot of wars, but somehow we manage to deal with it without doing that. But then we just kind of ignore the root cause, which is the CO2 emissions, and we keep screwing up the planet to the point where the biosphere cracks and it precipitates. Like, we're already in a mass extinction event, but it causes a mass extinction event of some set of species that hold up all the other pillars of the food web on the planet. And then the other one is the geopolitical thing where we end up just kind of killing ourselves.
Yeah. But how does this happen? The climate change in regards to the displacement of people, because that's what we're talking about whenever we talk about how it's going to cause all these tensions, because you're going to have massive displacements of people and shifting of economies in very rapid and sudden ways. Take, for example, California. California is in the midst of, if not its worst, one of its worst droughts in recorded history. Yes, they've had some rain this past year, but when you look at like what I said in Syria, even though they get rain, the soil is so damaged that it doesn't do as much good as it should. It doesn't get absorbed into the watershed. It evaporates back real quick, or it causes flash flooding, which destroys more croplands. But California is lucky that they are the 6th largest economy in the world, right? They have a larger economy than France, I believe. One state. They're so wealthy that they can afford to buy the water of other states and import it in. Syria can't do that. There's no way. They don't have nearly as much money as California does. But what happens when other states say, we need that water more than you, California. We're sorry, we can't sell it to you. Or they just make it where it's so over, like the price is so high that California just puts itself in so much debt just to get water. People aren't going to be able to live there. California has a huge population. It is in a huge population that lives below the poverty line as well. So you're going to have all these people that are going to be displaced because they can no longer afford to live in California, and they're going to be going to the central United States because they can't stay in like Nevada or Arizona because they're going to be being hit with the same problems. They have to go to where the jobs are, and that's going to be flowing into the central United States where we don't have the infrastructure to support these huge population increases. Like, for example, my college town of San Marcos, it was a very small town with a small university, and the university went from about 18,000 students a year to they're trying to get up to 50,000. I think last year they were at 45,000, and they did this all in less than about six to 8 years. And the town could not grow in those 6 to 8 years fast enough to handle the influx of students. Pretend those students are California refugees to that town. You think they're going to be as patient as students? You think they have the same financial structures as students? No. And if the town can't keep up and then the people can't afford to pick up the slack of the town, you're going to have just a snowballing effect. And that can happen. That's going to happen all over the world, a global scale. That was just an example with California. But that's going to happen in all of these regions where you have rising temperatures, you have increased droughts, they last longer, they're more severe, you have crop destruction. It is not an isolated issue. And that is how it's going to cause all of this instability all over the world, and that's why it is the greatest threat to our national security. You're going to have massive population shifts in a short amount of time.
Yeah, and I think we could go pretty deep onto the doomsday track, and I would like to touch on that just for a minute. Like, the severity of this and some of the short-sightedness of human nature is something that does worry me very greatly in all of this. I think Carl Sagan said it really well, that, you know, when it comes to the issues that we face with climate change, he said, you know, maybe it's too much. Maybe the special interests, the corruption, the the baser human natures, the fear of the other, and the selfishness is too deeply entrenched both in our economic, political systems and in our own psyches for us to overcome this. And maybe in the end we are doomed. But also humans have risen to the challenge to create great amounts of fundamental change in an incredibly short period of time. The thing that worries me that the latter won't happen is that this is on a long enough time scale that we can get complacent about it, and we obviously have because we're already feeling the negative effects of it. But we're also starting to wake up, and that's where the hope is. Like, it is not too late, because to take your analogy of students coming into San Marcos, well, you mentioned their resources. What if the refugees did have the resources that the students have? Well, that's something that we can do. We can give those people those resources who are desperate, who are poor, who have lost everything in their homes because of the short-sightedness of generations of not just people in this country and people in power in this country, but all across the developed world, not making the change in how we produce energy. It is not these people's fault as they get displaced by this. So I think we could make available the resources to these refugees and not do what we're doing right now in Syria. Because then there would be the patience, then there could be the time, the buffer to create a little bit of stability in an otherwise unstable situation and give us the time geopolitically and technologically and economically to develop the energy systems and the infrastructure to really deal with this. And I'm hoping that is what is going to be the case. It's a big part of the reason why I know you wanted to start doing this podcast, is so you could get this information out there. And I think this is a really important thing to touch on, that there is hope that this can be solved, that we can't do things about it.
Real quick, there is hope, and there is real things we can do that will stop this. But we've also kind of shot ourselves in the foot in a way that we've run out of time to let small things build up. We need real, substantial policy change. Our nation's leaders have to vote and have to put forth legislation and pass legislation that is very far-reaching and not something that is kind of for show. We're past that point where we can do little things and have those add up. We don't have as much, just like how with the missions, the EM1 and the EM2, where the timeline is the deciding factor. We are on a timeline here, and we're reaching the end of when we can pull ourselves back. We still have time.
Yeah.
And I believe that we can do these things that are needed, but it's not going to be easy. It's going to take sacrifice. It's going to be a massive and sudden change, and it's going to be scary as hell. But I promise you, the alternative and letting the status quo run its course is far, far worse. Far more people will die. There will be far more suffering, and there will be far more evil in the world as evil, greedy men try to manipulate the situations for their own benefit.
There's also the really, really big bad scenario where none of us make it through it. Our species dies out.
The Earth can live without humans. The humans can't live without the Earth. I know that sounds cliche, and in some ways it might be, but it's true. Well, we have to take care of our home.
And so I'm sure some of y'all might be wondering, okay, well, this is all terrible.
It's all doom and gloom, and Justin put on his serious teacher voice.
It's all terrible, and I agree there are things we can do, and we're going to feel some of these negative effects, and we can't do anything about it. But, well, what the hell, Carl, are you talking about trying to go to Mars for then? And I don't think that's an illegitimate point, but I think in the greater scheme of things, that the act of going to the moon helped actually galvanize the environmental movement. Legislation began to move through. The beginnings of nuclear proliferation treaties between the United States and the Soviet Union started years after we saw our home, the planet Earth, in its entirety from Apollo 8 to Apollo 17.
And another thing, I know that the timeline might not be perfect, but the last time we went to space, or the last time we went to the moon, and we were focused on these missions of that nature, it also kind of led hand in hand with the information age and what we have now. A lot of those technologies came out of NASA.
Yeah. So the act of sending humans to Mars may not directly feed into the solutions to this problem, but the resources that would be spent on doing it are so minuscule versus by the simple act of this exploration, we may galvanize ourselves and motivate ourselves as a society to do other great big things. The Earth will be a tiny blue star, a speck of light to the people that visit Mars. And I promise there will be a camera that will never leave that spot in the sky so long as it can be seen. And that profoundness, that connection of all of humanity across these hundreds of millions of miles, and that image of this tiny little dot of light, that's it. That's all we got. You know, one day, yeah, a child will be born off the planet Earth. And one day we will move forward into the solar system, and one day maybe even beyond. But for the time being, the Earth is where we make our stand. But by the act of this perspective-changing task, it may well give us some of the tools that we need, both technologically and culturally, that we need to motivate and physically solve some of the problems that we're going to face down here on the planet Earth because of climate change.
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. Maybe I could have said it a little bit shorter, but definitely not better.
Yeah, well, if you can use 3 words instead of one, or if you could have used 3 words instead of one, but you used one, you're doing it wrong.
There you go. But so that is why all of this stuff is important to us and why we're passionate about it. And we hope that our passion is contagious and we motivate you to do your own research into these fields and other fields that you're interested in, and get involved in the policies that affect your everyday life, not just today, but also tomorrow.
I hope to be participating in this will probably be published a little bit after it happens, but I hope to be participating in the March for Science with some of my friends that I met through some of my internships in Houston. And I know you, Justin, said you're going to be in Austin.
I will be at the Austin one.
Yeah.
It's April 22nd, I believe, right?
Yeah, April 22nd, Earth Day. Be involved. Get out there. When it comes time to vote, vote early, vote often, vote every time that you can.
Write your legislatures.
Yeah.
Representatives.
Make sure they know that their jobs are on the line if you do not support, not necessarily what we support, but if they don't support science-based policy in general, like, their ass is going to be on the chopping block, because this information is screaming at us. The engineering and the science and the people that are motivated to make these great journeys possible and these great, amazing changes possible here on Earth for the better for all humanity, whether it be voyages to Mars, Europa, voyages to the bottom of the ocean, and investigations into our own home and the fundamental physics that we'll need in order to completely reshape our energy economy to help save the biosphere for ourselves. All of that comes from science. And that's why Justin and I are making this podcast, so we can talk about these little things that are going on within these greater pictures and try and help you understand how it all fits together, why it's important, how it all works, and just so you know what's going on, and that if you already are interested in this, know that there's other folks that are interested in it too, and we can create a community around it. So we thank you for listening. Tune in 2 weeks for our next episode. Right now, my general idea is probably either going to be, I'm going to pick out some of the newer missions that are Earth science missions, because there's a whole suite of satellites that are up there, and kind of cover that. Or maybe considering that most likely, since we have a Republican-controlled House and Senate and White House, and they like the idea of going and landing on the moon, I might outline some of the hardware that would be getting it done based off of studies from the previous Republican administration, the George W. Bush administration, and the Constellation program.
Sounds
probably
interesting.
I'm probably leaning towards the Earth science stuff at least first, but I do want to go over the moon hardware at some point so people can get an idea of what the nitty-gritty of what will likely be the proposals from the administration and coming down from NASA in the future about lunar surface operations, because I think that's just, given the people in the transition team, that sounds like what it will be is lunar surface operations rather than cis-lunar space operations only, as part of the journey to Mars. But Republicans and Democrats are united on the whole Mars thing. So that's probably what I'm planning for the next episode. And I think you said, Justin, you want to go to Tinfoil Hat Land?
No,
Yes?
we
No,
can't.
maybe?
We can't take Conspiracy Land onto the podcast. We can't promote ignorance. I know it's fun to go to Russia Conspiracy Land with our tinfoil hats, and maybe in a lighthearted manner we can go over some of the stuff that's happening. But until it's proven, I'm hesitant to bring it on to In Space and on the Left, because we do pride ourselves on not spreading ignorance, making sure what we're saying.
This is true. I do think it would be kind of nice to have a synopsis.
I can
of
definitely,
what we do know.
I can definitely go over what we know. I'll either do that, so I can either give a rundown, like a breakdown of what we know about the Russian involvement and kind of what some of the leads that we know are being investigated are right now, just what we know, kind of go over that. Or I can talk about the great thing that is fracking and what it is, how it works, and how it's affecting
That's
local
I think we should double up on the environmentalism for Earth Day. For our Earth Week
All right.
episode.
We're gonna
be double up on the environmentalism.
We're gonna be going
I'm
to
locked
the.
in. I'm gonna investigate some the I'll say the 4 or 5 newest Earth science missions that NASA is doing, and what they do and what they tell us about our world. And
then
you do how fracked things are.
We will be going to the home of Jeffrey Beauregard Sessions. How about that? Going to Oklahoma.
Oklahoma.
We're going to be talking about some of their large-scale fracking operations and what it's done to that poor state. That poor state.
Where your grandpappy and my poppy is from.
Yeah, running that moonshine, that bootleg moonshine.
That's how our family ended up in Texas. Did you know that story?
Yeah, we got. It would have been my great-grandpa, your grandpa.
Yeah. Got kicked out of Oklahoma for running moonshine.
Yep.
Went
Anyway,
down to
guys,
Texas.
thank you so much for listening to the second episode of In Space and on the Left. We hope you're enjoying it. We hope you're learning something. And above all else, we hope you're having fun. If you like our podcast, be sure to share it on Twitter, Facebook, whatever social media you use. Like Carl said, we want to build a community of individuals that have fact-based discussions on science and the policies behind the science. And thanks for watching, guys. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have any recommendations for us, comments, criticisms, anything like that, just let us know in the comment section. We'll be sure to read through all of those.
To not just promote, but subscribe, and we'll see y'all in 2 weeks.
All right. Thank you so much.